heart of the Western Roman Empire, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, on August 21st, 410 AD. The story of the sack of Rome goes back to when the last emperor to rule both halves of the Roman Empire, Theodosius I, used Alaric's tribesmen to his advantage during the civil strife between him and his usurper Eugenius. Alaric lost over 10,000 of his warriors, helping Theodosius keep his crown at the Battle of Frigidus on September 6, 394 AD, and felt slighted by the emperor when he barely received any recognition or accolades from him. When Theodosius died on January 17, 395 AD, Alaric revolted and led his army towards Constantinople. He diverted his warriors from marching on the city at the last minute and instead went on a pillage tour of the Balkans and eventually sacked Athens and left a trail of looting and destruction before he was chased out of the region by Roman general Stilicho, but he came back when the general and his army left the area. In 398, the Eastern Roman Empire gave in to Alaric and made him military commander of the Illyricum, along with gold, arms, and food that was needed to keep his soldiers happy. They felt he was a lesser of the evils that were threatening the empire's borders at the time, which included the Huns, but his command was taken from him in 400 AD. Alaric's rival, the Roman general Stilicho, would cross paths with the Visigoth king and would thwart his invasion of Italy in 401 through 403 AD. Stilicho, however, would eventually fall out of favor with the Western Roman Empire, and without his leadership and skill for fighting barbarians, was lost when he was executed on August 22, 408 AD, due to rumors of him trying to betray the crown. Without Stilicho there to defeat him, along with the internal dysfunction of the Western and Eastern empires running rampant, Alaric took advantage of this situation and marched onto Rome in the fall of 408 and besieged the city. Alaric and his 30,000 warriors laid siege to Rome, and after a few weeks the Roman Senate sent out envoys to parlay with the Visigoth king, who was starving out Rome, and told him that they had a city filled with a bunch of angry and desperate people. He reportedly said, "The thicker the hay, the easier mowed." After parleying, Alaric agreed to the Roman payment of 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, 4,000 silken tunics, 3,000 scarlet dyed hides, and 3,000 pounds of pepper. During this time period, he also recruited 40,000 barbarian slaves into his ranks. A year later, Alaric came back to Rome and threatened to siege the city again. He even named his own emperor, the Roman senator Attalus. The Roman Senate, fearful of another drawn-out siege by Alaric, voted to allow his emperor Attalus to become Rome's new leader, and later the two marched along with Alaric's army upon the city of Ravenna. The rightful emperor of the West, Honorius, who was governing the empire from the city of Ravenna, heard about Alaric and his Roman Senate-supported emperor marching towards his capital, was about to flee for the safety of Constantinople. But Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II sent over 4,000 soldiers to Ravenna to protect Honorius from being deposed by Alaric and Attalus. When Attalus's troops were defeated by soldiers loyal to Honorius in North Africa in a battle to see who would control the empire's grain supply, Alaric dismissed his puppet emperor and decided to parley with Honorius. Several months later, Honorius and Alaric set up a meeting in Ravenna, but when he nearly lost his life, when he and his men were attacked by one of his rivals, Sarus, in the city, Alaric felt that Honorius had set him up and he wanted revenge. Honoric, along with over 40,000 of his warriors, attacked Rome for the third time on August 24, 410 AD, and sacked the city for 3 days. The Visigoth invaders entered the city through the Salarian Gate, which was either opened by starving civilians or an inside man. The mausoleums of Augustus and Hadrian were ransacked and pillaged by the barbarians who were looking for anything of value. The Visigoths ran off with a 2,000-pound solid silver ciborium from the Lateran Palace. The barbarians began to take anything of value that wasn't nailed down. All of the buildings were stripped bare, even the decorative trimmings. After they ran off with anything of value, the Visigoths turned toward the women in the city. They even took Honorius' sister, Placidia. 85-year-old Marcella, a Christian woman who donated her family's wealth to charity years ago, was brutalized by the barbarians, who thought she was hiding a cache of valuables. After none were found, some of Alaric's men realized she was a holy woman and escorted her to one of the city's churches that was being used as a sanctuary. Marcella died from her injuries, but she was made a saint by the Roman Catholic Church years later for her role in the founding of monasticism. Marcella's student Principia, who was at her side when the barbarians came into her home, wrote to St. Jerome about the incident, and he wrote back saying, when the soldiers entered, she is said to have received them without any look of alarm, and when they asked her for gold, she pointed to her coarse dress to show them that she had no buried treasure. However, they would not believe her in her self-chosen poverty, but scourged her with cudgels. She is said to have felt no pain, but to have thrown herself at their feet, and to have pleaded with tears for you that you might not be taken from her, or, owing to your youth, to have to endure what she, as an old woman, had no occasion to fear. Christ softened their hard hearts, and even among the blood-stained swords, natural affection asserted its rights. The barbarians conveyed both you and her to the basilica of the Apostle Paul, and that you might find there either a place of safety, or if not, at least a tomb. The basilicas of St. Peter and Paul were designated sanctuary spots for the people of Rome, which protected them from being butchered or savaged. A British Roman monk named Pelagius, who witnessed the sack of Rome, wrote, this dismal calamity is but just over, and you yourself are witness to Rome that commanded the world was astonished at the alarm of the Gothic trumpet, and when the barbarous and victorious nation stormed her walls and made her way through the breach. Where were, then, the privileges of birth and the distinction of quality? Were not all ranks and degrees leveled at the time and promiscuously huddled together? Every house was then a scene of misery and equally filled with grief and confusion. The slave and man of quality were in the same circumstances, and everywhere the terror of death and slaughter was the same, unless we may say the fright made the greatest impression on those who had the greatest interest in living. According to Eastern Roman historian Procopius, Emperor Honorius, who was hiding out in the Western Empire's new capital Ravenna, wrote, at the time they say Empress Honorius in Ravenna received the message from one of his eunuchs, evidently a keeper of the poultry, that Rome had perished, he cried out, and yet it had just eaten from my hands. For he had a very large cockerel, Rome by his name, and the eunuch comprehending his words said that it was the city of Rome which had perished at the hands of Alaric. And the emperor with a sigh of relief answered quickly, but I thought my foul Rome had perished. So great, they say, was the folly which this emperor was possessed. Thousands of people fled the city of Rome. Most of them headed for North Africa to flee the barbarians. St. Jerome wrote about the mass exodus of civilians fleeing the city. Who would have believed that Rome, built up by the conquest of the whole world, had collapsed, that the mother of nations had become also their tomb, that the shores of the whole east of Egypt of Africa, which once belonged to the imperial city, were filled with the host of her men servants and maid servants, that we should every day be receiving in this holy Bethlehem men and women who were noble and abounding in every wealth, but are now reduced to poverty. We cannot relieve these sufferers. All we can do is sympathize with them and unite our tears with theirs. There is not a single hour nor a single moment in which we are not relieving crowds of brethren, and the quiet of the monastery has been changed into a bustle of a guest house, and so much in this case we must either close our doors or abandon the study of the scriptures on which we depend for keeping our doors open. Who could boast when flight of the people of the West and the holy places, crowded as they are with penniless fugitives, naked and wounded, plainly reveal the ravages of the barbarians? We cannot see what has occurred without tears and moans. Who would have believed that mighty Rome, with its careless security of wealth, would be reduced to such extremities as a need to shelter, food, and clothing? And yet some are so hard-hearted and cruel that instead of showing compassion, they break up the rags and bundles of the captives and expect to find gold among those who are nothing more than prisoners. Alaric and his Visigoth warriors would leave Rome after 3 days and continue down south, sacking more cities. They tried to sail down to Sicily and North Africa, but their fleet was destroyed by a storm. Stuck in Italy with no ships and all of the stuff they looted, Alaric waited for a few months before marching north. But he died in 411 AD, months after he sacked the city of Rome from a fever. He was buried in southern Italy with his most valuable prizes and possessions. The slaves who helped bury Alaric were killed, so nobody knew where his tomb was. Rome was always in danger of being sacked again, as the barbarians viewed it as the heart of the Western Roman Empire, and then less than 5 decades later, it would be looted again, this time by the Vandals.